On the first day of November in the year 1955, the world of commercial aviation was about to lose its innocence. The evening was crisp and clear over Denver, Colorado, as United Airlines Flight 629 prepared for its journey. The aircraft, a sturdy Douglas DC-6B nicknamed Mainliner Denver, sat on the tarmac at Stapleton Airport, its silver body reflecting the runway lights. Passengers were boarding, business travelers, families returning home, individuals embarking on new adventures. Among them was Daisy King, a 53-year-old woman on her way to Alaska to visit her daughter. There was nothing to suggest this flight would be anything other than perfectly routine, another ordinary departure in a nation increasingly connected by air. The aircraft taxied down the runway, and at 6:52 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, lifted gracefully into the darkening sky. Its route was a common one, having originated in New York City with stops in Chicago and now Denver, before its final legs to Portland and Seattle. For the 39 passengers and 5 crew members aboard, the gentle ascent was a familiar sensation. Below, the lights of the city began to shrink into a glittering carpet. The plane climbed steadily, heading north, a beacon of progress and modern travel cutting through the night. The flight was just 11 minutes old when, without any warning, it vanished from the sky in a blinding flash of orange and red. On the ground, scattered across the quiet farming communities near Longmont, Colorado, people looked up from their evening chores. They heard a sound that was not thunder. It was a violent, concussive blast that echoed across the plains, followed by a horrifying silence. Then came the rain of fire. Flaming pieces of metal, fragments of human lives, and personal belongings fell from the sky, peppering the sugar beet fields below. The magnificent Mainliner Denver had been torn apart. The explosion was so catastrophic, so total, that it disintegrated the aircraft mid-flight. There were no survivors. Every single one of the 44 souls on board was lost instantly. In the immediate aftermath, the assumption was a tragic, yet understandable, mechanical failure. Plane crashes were not unheard of, though each one was a profound shock. But as the first light of dawn revealed the true extent of the devastation, investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board and the Federal Bureau of Investigation began to piece together a far more sinister narrative. The wreckage was strewn over 6 square miles, a telltale sign of an in-flight breakup. Soon, the evidence would point not to an accident, but to a deliberate act of mass murder. This was the first confirmed bombing of a commercial airliner in the history of the United States, a crime born of greed and malice. The explosion of United 629 was more than just a disaster. It was a profound violation. Someone intentionally brought down a plane full of innocent people. For the American public in 1955, that was almost inconceivable. Air travel was still a symbol of glamour, optimism, the nation's technological prowess. This act shattered that perception. It introduced a terrifying new vulnerability. This wasn't political terrorism as we think of it today. It was deeply personal and chillingly calculated. The bomber wasn't a foreign enemy or a political radical. He was one of their own, a 23-year-old from Denver, John Gilbert Graham. He planted a sophisticated dynamite bomb in his own mother's suitcase. His background mattered, a troubled past, simmering resentment, cold-blooded financial greed. He wanted life insurance money. He bought a policy minutes before her flight. The FBI treated the investigation as landmark. Agents sifted through tons of wreckage for the blast's origin. The trial became a national spectacle, one of the first trials ever televised. Graham confessed. He showed no remorse. The nation was captivated and horrified. The bombing became a grim benchmark for domestic terrorism. It led to baggage screening, changes in insurance rules, new federal laws making aircraft bombing a capital crime. Flight 629 is the origin story of modern airline security. A somber reminder, the sky was no longer safe. Deep within the forward cargo bay of the Mainliner Denver, nestled among the ordinary luggage, was a single, heavy suitcase. It belonged to Daisy King. To the baggage handlers who loaded it onto the aircraft, it was indistinguishable from any other piece of luggage. It was a large, two-toned Samsonite case, sturdy and unassuming. There was nothing about its outward appearance to suggest the deadly mechanism hidden within. This suitcase was the vessel for a crime of unimaginable cruelty, a Trojan horse carrying destruction into the heart of the aircraft. No one thought to inspect its contents. In 1955, the idea of screening passenger baggage for explosives was simply not a consideration. Inside the suitcase, packed carefully among Mrs. King's clothes and personal belongings, was a homemade bomb of formidable power. It had been constructed by her son, Jack Graham, with a chilling degree of precision. The device consisted of 25 sticks of dynamite, a quantity far more than necessary to destroy the aircraft. The dynamite was connected to two electrical blasting caps, which were in turn wired to a simple battery and a timer. Graham, who had some experience with electronics and demolitions from a brief stint in the Coast Guard and various labor jobs, had built a crude but brutally effective detonator. He had set the timer to go off approximately 90 minutes after he armed it, calculating that this would be enough time for the plane to be well on its way. The design of the bomb was intended to ensure total annihilation. Graham knew that a mid-air explosion would be catastrophic, leaving little chance for survival or for the cause of the crash to be easily determined. He hoped the investigation would conclude that the crash was an accident, a result of mechanical failure, allowing him to quietly collect on the insurance policies he had taken out on his mother. The main policy, worth $37,500, the equivalent of over $400,000 today, had been purchased from a vending machine at the airport just minutes before his mother boarded the plane. He also stood to inherit her considerable estate. For Graham, the suitcase was not just a bomb, it was a key to a future of financial freedom, purchased with blood. As Flight 629 climbed toward its cruising altitude, the timer on the device in Daisy King's suitcase silently counted down. The mechanism was inexorable, unaffected by the altitude or the motion of the plane. It was a small mechanical heart of darkness beating secretly in the cargo hold. The passengers and crew above were completely oblivious to the lethal countdown happening just a few feet beneath their cabin floor. The flight was proceeding perfectly, a smooth and tranquil journey through the night. But the hidden cargo ensured that this tranquility was a fragile illusion, about to be shattered in the most violent way imaginable. The flight plan of the mainliner Denver was about to be irrevocably and tragically altered. Within minutes of the explosion, the phone lines at local police and fire departments began to light up. Frantic calls flooded in from across Weld County and Boulder County, shaken residents reporting a loud explosion and a plane falling from the sky in flames. The initial reports were chaotic and confusing, but the message was clear. A major disaster had occurred. Volunteer firefighters were immediately dispatched. Sheriff's deputies were immediately dispatched. State patrol officers were immediately dispatched, racing into the night toward the reported locations of falling debris. They had no idea of the true scale of the scene they were about to encounter. They only knew that a plane was down and lives were at stake. The first emergency crews to arrive were met with a scene of utter devastation. The darkness was punctuated by the flickering of small fires, the sweeping beams of flashlights. The sheer size of the debris field was overwhelming. It was not a single crash site, but a vast, 6-square-mile area littered with twisted metal, personal belongings, and the tragic remains of the victims. The primary impact crater, where the bulk of the fuselage had hit, was a smoldering hole in the earth. Responders quickly realized that this was not a rescue mission. The violence of the crash had been so absolute that there was no hope of finding survivors. As more help arrived, a grim and methodical search began, guided by local farmers who knew the land. Teams of police officers fanned out across the sugar beet fields. Volunteers fanned out across the sugar beet fields. The task was horrifying. They were not just looking for wreckage, they were recovering the victims. Their initial actions to preserve the site were crucial, laying the groundwork for the FBI investigators who were already en route to Colorado, for the Civil Aeronautics Board investigators tasked with answering the terrible question of what had brought down United Flight 629. The investigation into the destruction of United Flight 629 quickly became one of the most intensive in the FBI's history up to that point. They collected tons of fragmented wreckage from the 6-square-mile debris field and transported it to a secure warehouse at Stapleton Airport. On a vast wooden framework outlining a DC-6B, a macabre three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle was assembled. Investigators noticed a pattern of damage originating from the forward cargo hold, number 4. Pieces of metal there were blackened, pitted, and bent outward, signs of an internal explosion. The FBI systematically checked to see if any of the passengers had recently purchased large life insurance policies. The search quickly led them to the airport terminal itself. One name, in particular, stood out: Daisy E. King. She was covered by a policy for $37,500, purchased just before the flight. The beneficiary listed on Mrs. King's policy was her son, John Jack Gilbert Graham. This immediately raised a red flag. Agents delved deeper into Graham's life and uncovered a troubling history: his petty criminal record, his constant financial troubles, and his acrimonious relationship with his mother. Employees at Daisy King's restaurant told investigators about the frequent, heated arguments between mother and son over money. A picture began to form of a deeply resentful young man with a powerful financial motive. On November 13, 1955, less than 2 weeks after the bombing, FBI agents brought Jack Graham in for questioning. Initially, Graham denied everything. He was calm, collected, and arrogant, certain that the authorities had no concrete proof to link him directly to the bomb. As the interrogation wore on, Graham's confident facade began to crack. They told him they were going to search his house, and they were confident they would find evidence linking him to the bomb's construction. This was the moment his composure finally broke. Realizing the net was closing, Graham's demeanor changed.
All right, where do you want me to start?
Over the next several hours, he delivered a full, detailed, and chillingly unemotional confession. He admitted his motive was purely financial. Throughout his confession, Graham showed no remorse for his actions. With the confession signed, the FBI had their man. Jack Graham was formally arrested and charged with murder. The trial began in Denver in the spring of 1956 and immediately became a national media sensation. The judge allowed television cameras into the courtroom. This was one of the very first trials to be televised live. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Burt Keating, built a methodical and damning case. However, Graham himself undermined this strategy. On the stand, he was articulate, intelligent, and lucid. After a week-long trial, the jury needed little time to deliberate. They returned with a verdict in just over an hour. John Gilbert Graham was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge, following the jury's recommendation, sentenced him to death. Following his conviction and death sentence, John Gilbert Graham was sent to the Colorado State Penitentiary in Canyon City to await his fate. During his time on death row, Graham remained largely defiant and unrepentant. On January 11, 1957, just over 14 months after he had watched United Flight 629 disappear into the night sky, John Gilbert Graham's final moment arrived. He was led from his cell to the prison's lethal gas chamber. Within minutes, John Gilbert Graham was dead. Justice, as defined by the laws of the time, had been served. While the story of United Flight 629 is often dominated by the sinister figure of John Gilbert Graham, it is the lives he extinguished that form the true heart of this tragedy. The 44 victims were not abstract statistics. They were individuals with families, dreams, and futures. There was a young mother traveling with her 13-month-old son. There were business executives. A group of 4 friends. Memorials have been erected near the crash site in Colorado, serving as a permanent tribute to the lives lost on that cold November night. In 1956, in direct response to the Graham case, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a new law that made the sabotage of an aircraft a federal crime, punishable by death. The painstaking process of reconstructing the aircraft from thousands of fragments set a new standard for air crash investigations. This event marked the beginning of the long, slow evolution of modern airline security. This single act of terror was the catalyst that would eventually lead, step by painful step, to the X-ray machines, security checkpoints, and stringent baggage protocols that define modern air travel. Every time we place our bags on a conveyor belt to be scanned, we are participating in a ritual whose roots trace back to that fiery explosion in the Colorado night. The crime forced a reluctant nation to trade a measure of its innocence and convenience for a greater degree of safety. By remembering this event, we honor the victims by acknowledging the profound impact of their sacrifice, ensuring that the lessons learned from the first bomber in the sky are never forgotten.